In the dusty little town of Red Rock, the dust sheriff stood tall against the backdrop of endless plains. His name, hardly ever spoken without respect, echoed among the townsfolk. With a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his sharp blue eyes and a weathered badge gleaming on his chest, he was a figure of strength and calm. Known for his fairness and quick thinking, the dust sheriff had earned his reputation as a protector of law and order. He didn't rely solely on brute force or fear. Instead, he spoke to the people, making them understand that justice was more than just punishment. Many remembered how he had once saved an innocent man from being wrongfully accused, reminding them that every story had two sides. The sheriff knew each family in town, their struggles and dreams. He valued peace over chaos, but in frontier times, peace often hung by a thread. As whispers about a young rustler's misdeeds began to swirl through the saloon and the streets, he sensed trouble brewing. The townsfolk were riled up and ready to take matters into their own hands. Little did they know that today would be a test of his resolve, a moment where true justice would be challenged amidst cries for raw frontier law. The young rustler, Jake, had only recently arrived in Red Rock, lured by promises of adventure and a fresh start. Yet, as he wandered the town, he found himself in dire circumstances. With his pockets empty and no friends to turn to, desperation clawed at him. He had heard tales of the vast herds grazing nearby, and his mind played tricks on him, whispering that stealing a few cattle could change his fortunes overnight. When night fell, Jake crept into the pasture, heart racing as he drove a small group of cows away. The thrill of the act filled him with a mix of excitement and fear, but it quickly turned sour when he realized the magnitude of what he was doing. Before he could make his escape, the sharp bark of a rancher's dog pierced the stillness of the night. The rancher, alerted by the commotion, rushed out and caught Jake in the act. Panic surged through him as he was seized by strong hands and dragged back toward town. Word spread like wildfire, and soon the townsfolk were gathering, fueled by anger and a thirst for quick justice. Jake could feel their eyes boring into him. He was trapped in a web of his own making, with nowhere to run and no way to hide from the consequences of his desperate actions. As news of Jake's capture spread through Red Rock, the atmosphere turned electric. At first, it was just a ripple of whispers in the general store, but soon voices grew louder, filled with outrage and calls for justice. The townsfolk gathered in groups, their faces hardening into scowls as anger took root in their hearts. "Cattle thieves have no place here," one burly rancher bellowed, causing others to nod and murmur their agreement. It wasn't long before a spark ignited the crowd. Fueled by stories of stolen livelihoods and broken trust, they began to move toward the town square like a storm gathering strength. A local farmer grabbed a pitchfork while another brandished a rope, both tools that echoed their determination for swift justice. The chants grew louder, calling for raw frontier law as they advanced with grim purpose. Fearlessly united by their shared anger, they transformed into a mob. With every step, shouts mingled with the sound of boots slapping against the dusty ground. The townsfolk were ready to take justice into their own hands, convinced that Jake deserved punishment without delay. As emotions flared and tensions rose, it became clear they would not be satisfied until justice was served in whatever form they believed appropriate. As the mob marched toward the town square, their voices rose in unison, chanting for raw frontier law. The phrase echoed through the dusty streets, a powerful call that embodied their desire for immediate action against Jake. This was not just a chant. It was a declaration of their frustration with a system that they felt often moved too slowly to deliver justice. With each step, the meaning behind raw frontier law became clear. They sought a brand of justice stripped of legal formalities, one that prioritized swift punishment rather than deliberation and mercy. It was a reflection of the tough life on the frontier where survival often meant harsh decisions and quicker resolutions. The townsfolk felt justified in their anger. Their livelihoods were built around hard work and the earth. To them, stealing a cow was akin to stealing a part of their identity. As they yelled, their faces twisted with determination, fueled by their collective desire to protect their community from anyone they deemed a threat. The mob's energy surged as they neared the makeshift gallows that loomed ominously in the square. a grim reminder of what awaited Jake. They were ready to enact their version of justice, and no one seemed willing to stand in their way. Fear of retribution hung heavily in the air. As the mob reached the town square, the atmosphere thickened with a charged tension. The rope, rough and frayed, was thrown over the beam of the makeshift gallows, and hands eagerly worked to tie knots that would ensure their intentions were clear. Each twist of the rope echoed a growing sense of urgency among the crowd, as fear and anger intertwined in their hearts. Fury flickered in the eyes of the townsfolk, their determination hardening into something darker. Some men's faces were flushed, fueled by adrenaline, while others wore expressions of grim resolution. The thought of Jake escaping punishment felt like an affront to their way of life, an injustice they could not allow to stand. Mothers and fathers stood among them, their bodies tense with protective instincts for their families and farms. Chants for raw frontier law became more urgent as emotions boiled over. The desire for quick justice turned into a primal urge for retribution. A few voices suggested letting him go if he confessed, but they were quickly drowned out by shouts demanding action. Nervous glances exchanged among the crowd reflected a fragile line between justice and vengeance, as they prepared to make a choice that could haunt them all. Just as the mob's fury reached its peak, the dust sheriff rode into town, kicking up a cloud of dust in his wake. He had been out on patrol when he caught wind of the commotion, and now he could see the tense faces of the townsfolk gathered in the square. Dismounting quickly, he felt the weight of their collective anger pressing against him like a wall. As he approached, he took in the sight of the makeshift gallows and the frayed rope hanging ominously above. The sheriff's keen eyes scanned the crowd, noting the flushed faces and determined stances of those around him. He knew that if he didn't act swiftly, this fragile situation could explode into chaos. "Hold on," he called out, raising his hands to calm the crowd. His voice carried authority tempered with urgency, cutting through their fervor. The townsfolk turned to face him, their murmurs shifting to uncertain whispers. The sheriff assessed their emotions. Fear, anger, and a desire for retribution writ large on their faces. "Let's not do something we'll regret," he urged, hoping to remind them of their shared humanity and the importance of true justice over vengeance. The challenge before him was clear. He needed to quell their rage and protect both Jake and the community from further harm. The sheriff stood firm, his presence a steady anchor amid the storm of chaos as the mob surged forward, fists clenched and voices raised. "Listen to me," he called out once more, his voice cutting through the clamor like a knife. The angered faces turned toward him, eyes wide with a mix of fury and confusion, desperate for validation of their feelings. "Jake may have made a terrible mistake," he continued, his tone calm yet commanding. "But we cannot let our anger push us to commit an even greater wrong." He could see the sharp glances exchanged among the crowd. Each person was wrestling with their emotions, caught between desire for justice and the instinct to lash out. The tension was palpable, with some men advancing while others hesitated, torn by doubt. The sheriff took a step closer, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon, a silent reminder of authority that demanded respect. "We are better than this," he said firmly, meeting each gaze with conviction. "Let's allow the law to take its course. We can't decide justice here today based on fear." The crowd began to waver as uncertainty seeped in. Would they listen to him? His heart raced as he hoped for reason to prevail over the wild impulses of the mob. With the crowd's frosty tension hanging in the air, the dust sheriff took a deep breath and began his speech. "Folks," he started, his voice steady and resonant. "I see your anger, and I understand your hurt, but we are better people than this." His eyes scanned the mob, meeting the furious gazes of those ready for violence. "We stand here today faced with a choice, to act out of fear or to stand for what is right. Jake made a mistake, yes, but in this community we must not become the very thing we oppose." He paused to let his words sink in, watching as some began to mull over their decisions. "This isn't just about a cow stolen. This is about our values," he continued passionately. "Justice should not be a weapon wielded out of rage. It should be measured, fair, and above all, It should bring peace rather than chaos. Raising his hand for emphasis, he spoke directly to those clutching pitchforks and ropes. The law is our guide. If we allow anger to blind us, we all risk becoming lost. Let us choose justice today so that tomorrow we can rebuild together. Your strength lies not in vengeance, but in unity and fairness. His words hung in the air like a lifeline, hoping to pull them away from the edge of violence. As the dust sheriff finished his speech, he felt a shift in the crowd, but uncertainty still lingered. Knowing action was necessary, he stepped forward with purpose. Approaching the lynching rope, which hung ominously over the makeshift gallows, he could hear whispers of dissent and doubt among the townsfolk. They were on the brink of a decision that could change their community forever. With a swift motion, he pulled out his pocket knife and raised it high. "This ends now," he declared firmly. The mob fell silent, eyes fixed on him as he severed the rope with one decisive cut. The frayed fibers fell to the ground, symbolizing not just the end of an impending act of violence, but also a hopeful step toward justice and understanding. The tension that had filled the square began to dissolve as the townsfolk absorbed what had just happened. The sheriff looked around, challenging them with his gaze. "Let this be a moment we remember, not for vengeance, but for fairness." It was a powerful message that resonated deeply. Some began to nod, their anger softening into contemplation. Today was a chance for healing, and his act of cutting down that lynch rope stood as a testament that true justice required courage over chaos. In the aftermath of the sheriff cutting down the lynching rope, a profound shift swept through the crowd. The angry shouts that once echoed in the town square began to fade, replaced by a heavy silence as the townsfolk processed what had just occurred. Faces that were once twisted in rage now wore expressions of confusion and contemplation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people exchanged uncertain glances, grappling with their collective emotions. The weight of their earlier intentions pressed down upon them, forcing many to reflect on their values as community members. Had they really been prepared to take a life over a stolen cow? The gravity of that realization settled uncomfortably in their hearts. Some individuals who had first called for swift punishment now felt a twinge of shame, recognizing that their desire for vengeance had threatened to overshadow their sense of justice. The sheriff's decisive act served as a mirror, reflecting back their fears and frustrations while urging them to reconsider what kind of community they wanted to be. As conversations began to shift from anger to discussion, it became clear that they were no longer just a mob seeking retribution. They were neighbors facing a choice about how to uphold justice together. In this moment of reflection, hope flickered like a candle in the dark, signaling the possibility of healing and unity ahead. In the days following the sheriff's intervention, the town of Red Rock began to heal, but the fate of Jake, the young rustler, remained a topic of heated discussion. With the mob's thirst for vengeance quelled, there was a collective agreement that Jake deserved fairness, a chance to explain himself and face consequences that fit his actions. The sheriff organized a meeting in the town hall, ensuring that everyone had the opportunity to voice their concerns and opinions about Jake's fate. As the townsfolk gathered, they were encouraged to look beyond their anger and consider the young man as a person struggling against desperation. Many knew what it was like to grapple with hard times. Some even shared stories of their own past mistakes. Ultimately, it was decided that Jake would face a fair trial presided over by the sheriff himself and a few respected townsfolk. The charges would include theft and vandalism, but the community also wanted to explore possibilities for restitution rather than harsh punishment. Jake's trial became something more than just a legal matter. It was an opportunity for everyone to engage in conversation about justice, choices, and compassion. As he stood before them, he felt a mixture of fear and hope, realizing he had a chance to turn his life around with their understanding instead of facing doom at the end of a noose. As the dust settled in Red Rock, the incident surrounding Jake's attempted lynching prompted deep reflections on law and order in a world shaped by desperation and fear. The sheriff's actions revealed that true justice is not merely about swift punishment. It is about understanding the complexities of human behavior and the circumstances that lead individuals to stray from the path of right. In towns like Red Rock, where resources are scarce and life can often be a struggle, emotions run high. and the call for immediate justice can overshadow the principles that define a fair society. The community's willingness to reconsider Jake's fate demonstrated a significant turning point, a realization that mercy and compassion could coexist with accountability. This incident left the townsfolk questioning what justice truly means in their lives. Is it an eye for an eye, or can it be something greater? As they faced the young rustler in trial, they were no longer just judging him. They were examining their own values, reflecting on how they wanted to shape their community moving forward. Ultimately, through this journey of chaos and reflection, Red Rock began to forge a path toward genuine justice, one built on understanding, fairness, and a shared commitment to healing rather than vengeance.